Hello aspirants, welcome to AQ IAS YouTube channel. This video is a part of our quick revision series Prelims Atulya. In today's session we'll discuss about early Vedic period. If you recall in the last session, in our first session, we spoke about Harappan cities. So by 1500 BC, the cities of Harappan culture had declined and their economic and administrative system had slowly declined too. Around this period, speakers of Indo-Aryan language entered the northwest India from Indo-Iranian region. Their initial settlements were in the valleys of northwest and the plains of Punjab. Remember, they were mainly cattle-keeping people, and they were mainly in search of pastures all the time. Now, what was the original home of the Aryans? Well, it is a debatable question, but there are several views. Bal Gangadhar Tilak argues that Aryans came from the Arctic region on astronomical calculations. But theory of southern Russia appears to be more probable and widely accepted by historians. Now let me put some light on Vedic literature. The word Veda, it is derived from the root word vid, and the literal meaning of this root word is to know. And there are four Vedas: Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam Veda, and Atharva Veda. As far as Rig Veda is concerned, remember it consists of 1028 hymns, and it is the earliest of the four Vedas. Yajur Veda contains details of rules which are to be observed at the time of sacrifice. And Sam Veda, it is a book of chants. And as far as the origin of Indian music is concerned, remember the origin of Indian music can be traced in it. Now let's have little idea about Brahmanas too. Brahmanas, they are related to prayer and sacrificial ceremony. Upanishads, we all know these are philosophical texts and they deal with topics like soul, origin of the world, and the mysteries of nature. And Arankyas, they are forest books and they deal with mysticism, rites, rituals, and sacrifices. So, this entire topic of Vedic literature is extremely important. And from the prelims perspective, you must have little idea about these books. Now, let's talk about Rig Vedic period. So, in this section, we'll specifically focus on Rig Vedic period. So, during Rig Vedic period, Aryans were mostly confined to the Indus region. In fact, Rig Veda mentions about Sub-Sindhu, or the land of seven rivers. Remember about these seven rivers: Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Bias, Satluj, Indus, and Saraswati. Now, this political, social, and cultural life of the Rig Vedic period can be traced from the hymns of the Rig Veda. Now, let's try to analyze the political life during those times. Remember, the basic unit of political organization was kula or family, and several families they joined together on the basis of their kinship and they formed a grama. And the leader of grama was known as Gramini. And these villages constituted a larger unit which was Visu. And this larger unit was headed by Vishyapati. But the important point that you must know is that highest political unit was Jana or tribe. So the head of this tribe or the head of this kingdom was called as Rajan or king. Now let's try to know more about the Rig Vedic polity. So as I said, the head of the kingdom was king, and the king was assisted by Purahita and Senani or commander of the army. And there used to be a sabha in those times. This sabha was a council of elders. And there used to be a samiti as well, which was a general assembly of the entire people. Now let me put some light on social life. So as far as the society is concerned, in those times society was patriarchal, and the basic unit of society was family, and the head of the family was grapati. Remember, monogamy was generally practiced, while polygamy was prevalent among the royal and noble families. This is an important point that you must know. As far as the situation of women is concerned, women were given equal opportunities as men for their spiritual and intellectual development. We have evidence of so many women poets like Apala, Viswavara, Ghosha, Lopamudra during the Rigvedic period. And in those times, there was no child marriage, and the practice of sati was absent. So both men and women, they wore upper and lower garments made up of cotton and wool. And remember, the eating of cow's meat in those times, it was prohibited. Why? Because cow was considered to be a sacred animal. Now let's try to understand the economic situation in those times. So remember, Rigvedic Aryans were mainly pastoral people. Their main occupation was cattle rearing. In fact, their wealth was estimated in terms of their cattle. So when they permanently settled in North India, they began to practice agriculture. And with the knowledge and use of iron, they were able to clean forest and bring more and more land under cultivation. Carpentry was also another important profession. You can also remember this point. Now, spinning was also an important occupation in those times. And potters in those times, they made various kinds of vessels for domestic use. Now, as far as the trade is concerned, trade was another important economic activity, and rivers served as an important means of transport. Now, remember that trade was conducted on a barter system. Although in the later times, gold coins called nishka were used as a medium of exchange, but initially trade was conducted on a barter system. Now let's try to have a little idea about the religious life during Rigvedic period. So Rigvedic Aryans worshipped the natural forces like earth, fire, wind, rain, and thunder. They personified these natural forces into many gods and worshipped them. And the most prominent and the most popular god was Indra. Next in importance to Indra was Agni, who was regarded as an intermediary between gods and people. As far as the Varuna is concerned, Varuna was supposed to be the upholder of the natural order. There were also female gods. Remember this point. There were also female gods like Aditi and Ushas. And in those times, there were no temples, no idol worship. This is also another important point. So prayers were offered to the gods in the expectation of rewards. Ghee, milk, and grains were given as offerings. And elaborate rituals were followed during the worship. So these are some important points that we have discussed vis-a-vis early Vedic period. Later Vedic period. So let's get started. So during later Vedic period, Aryans further moved towards east. And here you can remember about Satpata Brahmana. This Satpata Brahmana mentions about the expansion of Aryans to the eastern Gangetic plains. Here you can remember about one important development. So during this period, one could see the growth of large kingdoms. And remember the example of Kuru and Panjala kingdoms. These two kingdoms flourished in the beginning. And later, after the fall of Kurus and Panchalas, other kingdoms like Kosala, Kasi, and Vidha, they came into prominence. And you can remember the famous ruler of Kasi who was Ajatsatru. So you can remember this name as well. Now, Magda, Anga, and Vanga, these were prominent easternmost tribal kingdoms. Now, remember, later Vedic texts also referred to three divisions of India: Aryavarta, which was North Indian part, Madhya Desa, Central India part, and Dakshinapatha, Southern India part. Now let's try to analyze the political situation in those times. So, as I said earlier, large kingdoms were formed during Rig Vedic period. So many tribes, remember this thing, that so many tribes they came together and formed big janpadas during this period. And as far as the royal power is concerned, royal power had increased along with the increase of the size of kingdoms. Now, as far as the situation of king is concerned, the king performed various rituals and sacrifices to strengthen his position. And those sacrifices include Rajsuva, Ashwamedha, and Vajpaya. Now, remember, the kings also assumed several titles, and these titles are also important from the prelims perspective. Now, let's try to analyze the economic situation. So, iron was used extensively in those times. This enabled the people to clear forest and to bring more land under cultivation. And improved types of implements were used for cultivation, and as I said earlier, that agriculture became the chief occupation. And remember about the industrial development. Industrial activity became more varied during that time. In addition to internal trade, foreign trade became more extensive. And remember one thing, that later Vedic period were familiar with the sea and they traded with countries like Babylon. Now, one important aspect that you must remember is that a class of hereditary Vaishyas, a class of hereditary merchants, they came into existence, and these Vaishyas carried on trade and commerce. And remember one thing, that they organized themselves into guilds, and those guilds were known as Ganas. This point is important from prelims perspective. Now, besides Nishka of Rig Vedic period, gold and silver coins like Satmana and Krishnala were used as a medium of exchange. Now, let's try to know about the social life of later Vedic period. The four divisions of society: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaisyas, and Shudras, or we can call it Varna system. Now, this Varna system was firmly established during Rig Vedic period, and two higher classes, Brahmana and Kshatriya, they enjoyed privileges that were denied to Vaishya and Shudra. Now, many subcastes on the basis of their occupation appeared during this period. You can also remember this point. During early Vedic period, we discussed that father was extremely powerful at the family level. And remember that during later Vedic period, the power of father increased considerably. And as far as the status of women is concerned, there was no improvement. They were still considered inferior and subordinate to men. In fact, women also lost their political rights of attending assemblies. As far as the child marriages are concerned, child marriages were common during those days. According to Atriya Brahmana, a daughter has been described as a source of misery. That's so unfortunate. Now let's try to know about the religious life during those times. So gods of early Vedic period like Indra and Agni, they lost their importance. And Prajapati, Vishnu, and Rudra, they became prominent during later Vedic period. Sacrifices, they were still important, and the rituals connected with them became more elaborate. And the importance, this is very, very important, remember this. The importance of prayers declined, and that of sacrifices increased considerably. Priesthood became a profession and a hereditary one. Now, towards the end of this period, there was this strong reaction against priestly domination and against sacrifices and rituals. And the rise of Buddhism and Jainism was the direct result of those elaborate sacrifices. In fact, authors of Upanishad, They turned away from the useless rituals and insisted on true knowledge for peace and salvation. So that's all for today's session, and we'll come up with another session with another topic. So I'll see you in the next session. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye bye.